Hi, I'm Lis Wiehl with Law&Crime. Okay, we are live there with the Wallace Bradsher case in North Carolina. A rather different kind of case where we're talking about wife swapping. Now, not wife swapping in the traditional sense, if I can use that word correctly or incorrectly. Wife swapping when you're talking about wife swapping of jobs, two prosecutors, two lawyers swapping their wives, literally putting them in different jobs in the prosecutorial arena. One lawyer has pled guilty to one charge. That's the lawyer that's actually on the stand being cross-examined by the other lawyer who's representing himself. That's Mr. Wallace Bradsher. He's the one doing the cross-examination. He's the one actually asking the questions of the lawyer, Craig Blitzer, who's on the stand. Bradsher himself has been charged with felonies, including obtaining property by false pretense, aiding and abetting, conspiracy, 3 counts of obstruction of justice, and then a misdemeanor failure of the discharge of duties to his office. Kind of a strange case to take apart. It's in North Carolina. People know each other. These are fairly high-profile people in the sense you've got talking about prosecutors, people of the state, charged with, I should say, a trust by people in the state locally. So this is kind of a big deal. It is a big deal in the state and more generally. So did I set this a little bit with me for this time here in the rest of the afternoon? I've got my dear friend Linda Kenney Baden with me here. You all know her very well in Law and Crime and beyond as the preeminent lawyer that she is. I'm so glad she's here with me today.
I'm excited to be here with you today, especially today.
Yeah, it's a kind of an exciting day here for me, especially. We'll talk about that later. But what do you think so far? You got kind of an interesting thing here with a prosecutor pro se cross-examining somebody that is really his co-conspirator, who's now pled guilty to something that he supposedly did with the guy who's actually asking the questions.
Well, my first reaction is, isn't it weird that there's a prosecutor on trial? Right. I mean, us defense attorneys want prosecutors to be tried when they wrongfully convict somebody or withhold evidence. And you see that prosecutors are not necessarily, above the law, and they may not follow the law if what the state now says is correct. And that is that they agreed to swap their wives and jobs so wives could have what basically were no-show jobs. Right. That's really the argument here.
Right. What do you think of the demeanor of both the prosecutor, the prosecutor now the defendant who's doing
Bradsher.
the defense here, and the defendant on the stand who's he's pled guilty. I mean, he's pled guilty to one charge. He's not going to jail. He's had to give up his law license. He's had to pay back the money that was taken from the state by his wife, Cindy. And so you hear a lot of talk about Cindy here in this. He's had to pay back the money, pay back his license. I mean, to lose his license, which to lose your bar card or your license for a lawyer, I mean, that's you lose your way of living. I mean, it's a big deal. What do you think of the demeanor of both of them, the way they're acting with each other?
Well, Mr. Blitzer, who is the person who is on the cross-examination, the prosecutor whose wife is Cindy, he's sweating a little bit on his hair. He's very uncomfortable being in this situation. And I said to you, I think before, I reminded me of Blitzer, the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, come Donner, come Blitzer. Right. He was like a deer in the headlights there. So, he's got this very, I don't want to be here.
He does.
He doesn't want it. And Bradsher actually is, I think, doing a nice job with him. Now, remember, the jurors know these people. This is politics at its local level. These people are elected, so they know him. I think he's doing a nice job. The real question here is that, remember, Bradsher's wife really worked for the money, whereas Blitzer's wife did not work for the money. So the question is, can that still be theft? Can that be conspiracy and be theft on both sides?
So Bradsher, the defendant who's still here, and the one that we're seeing the trial of, is really, it's almost more of a technical argument that he's trying to make, right? That she did actually work for the money, and so technically was it stealing from the government here? Whereas Blitzer,
no doubt.
Just no show.
She was going to nursing school, Cindy, while she was and I guess the prosecution is trying to say that Bradsher's wife didn't work sometimes, but I think the general feeling was that she worked most of the time. Now, remember, this all comes from the law that says if you're going to have some kind of nepotism, that is hiring somebody from your own family, you have to do it carefully. And the area here is it's not per se illegal. Nepotism isn't per se illegal. The argument here is that there's theft of services because they weren't doing it very carefully because they wanted to steal money. And the question is, did both of them want to steal money or just one of them want to steal money?
Okay, we shall see what you'll see. Okay, so we've given you a little bit of a taste of what's going on here now. We've given you a break. Let's go back into the testimony. Remember, now we're in the cross-examination. It seems a little strange, but we're in a cross-examination of a defendant who has already pled guilty. We've got the prosecutor, who is now the defendant, on the stand, doing the actual cross-examination of someone who's already pled guilty, his co-conspirator. Let's go back to that. Lis Wiehl with Law and Crime. Okay, we're live in the Bradsher case. It looks like we're taking a bit of a break in this case. Remember, this case is now about wife swapping. And now you all might be thinking about, wife swapping? What is Lis talking about? No, I mean wife swapping in the prosecutor's office, where we're talking about wife swapping over jobs, where you've got two prosecutors who swap their wives to do different jobs. And one prosecutor, a Mr. Blitzer, has already pled guilty to one charge. Did he go to prison? No, he didn't go to prison over it. But he did lose his law license. And he also had to pay back all of the money that Cindy, his wife, didn't earn from the state. He had to pay back all of that. He was just on the stand, and he was just being cross-examined by the prosecutor who is being charged in this case, who is now the defendant. So you were seeing just a moment ago that there's a picture of the prosecutor turned now defendant, who was doing the cross-examination of the other prosecutor who was on the stand. So we're taking a break in that case, but that is ongoing, and we're going to go back to that as soon as it comes back. It's a fascinating case. It's as Linda Kenney Baden was just pointing out, fascinating in the sense that these are local prosecutors who hold, a high visibility in this North Carolina town where they are, entrusted. They're prosecutors. They prosecute cases for we the people. And being a former prosecutor myself, I take this really hard. North Carolina, too, has not a great history of late, and of late years, when it comes to prosecutors. North Carolina, you may recall, had the case, the rape, the Duke Lacrosse case some years back with the, Linda, you remember this one?
Yes.
With Mike Knife on,
yeah,
right?
Right, that's correct.
And in that case, the prosecutor was actually charged with many wrongdoings in prosecuting that case. That turned out to be a horrible, awful hoax. He not only lost his license, he did a day in prison in that case.
That's right. Well, he should have, because there was no rape, as it turns out.
Right.
And indeed, the prosecutor withheld evidence that would have cleared these four young men at the time of criminal activity. Instead, their lives were initially ruined. Whether they've gotten any of them back, I don't know. I mean, I know some of them have gone forward with their lives. And the prosecutor finally was the defendant because he did wrong. So when we see prosecutors on trial or have pled guilty to wrongdoing, it really hurts everybody. You and I were both prosecutors. We would never think of doing something like this. And you and I would never withhold evidence. So how people do that is beyond me.
And I think, we can say, well, this is a wife swapping case. It's pretty low level in the sense of, we here at Law and Crime, we cover a lot of murder cases and, abduction cases. People are actually wounded or worse. Why is such a big deal being made of this? But because they're prosecutors entrusted with public, so much public trust, I do think it's important that they are held to a higher standard, and that we, as media, we do cover it. So I think it's important that it's done.
I agree with you, and it'd be interesting to see what the verdict is, though, because this is really a white-collar crime case, isn't it? And they just stole money. If it is true, certainly one of them has pled guilty to it. Mr. Blitzer's pled guilty to having his wife take money on this wife swapping. So we'll see.
Well, we're going to transition right now to the other case that we've been following, out of Kansas. We've been following this case now for about 4 days. This is a Sesmas case. It's such a sad case, Linda. I mean, this case just breaks my heart. As you know, this is the case where a woman has been accused of stealing, of murdering a pregnant woman, taking the child and taking the child for her own, passing the child off as her own. There's a picture of her right now. The Sesmas case, excuse me. And we have a verdict in. We have a verdict in found out from a jury that has been deliberating not very long, Linda, not very long at all. But that's actually not too much of a surprise.
No,
I don't think too much of a surprise. Oh, there's pictures of the poor little baby. I mean,
he's going to grow up without his mother.
Oh my goodness, so sad. Yeah, no matter what verdict is in, no matter how this comes out, look at the pictures there. No matter how this verdict comes in, the end result is that poor little baby is going to grow up without his biological mother, and there's nothing that can bring that back. We're going to have a verdict. We know that the verdict has been rendered. We don't know what it is yet because it has to, as you know, there's a procedure that happens whenever we get a verdict. The jury will be brought in, and the court reporter or the bailiff, depending, it's different on different jurisdictions. Sometimes it's the judge, but will read the actual verdict. The defendant has to stand there or sit there. Again, it depends on the different jurisdiction, and listen to the verdict being read. And then oftentimes the jury is polled. That means that each juror is asked individually, is this your well and true verdict? And they say yes, usually. And that everybody has to sit there and stand there in solemnity and listen to that. Sometimes in the courtroom, if you've got people in the courtroom in the background, they break out in, some kind of reaction. So we are always listening to what's going on there. But it is a pretty, traumatic, dramatic scene usually, especially in a case like this where we are talking about a young woman who was murdered and in a horrible, violent way, and her baby taken from her. It's just been such a sad case to follow. But the jury was out for a fairly, relatively short amount of time. I don't believe, I could be wrong, and my producer will tell me if I am, but I don't believe there were any questions that the jury asked. They were out, no questions were asked, so it was a very short time. No questions were asked of the from the jury, so they came out pretty quickly. I think they had a bite to eat, some pizza. They asked for some pizza so they could eat it quickly. That means, they didn't want to go out for lunch. They didn't want to order sandwiches in. To me, pizza means you kind of just get it. You're able to just get a slice like that, get some soda, whatever, and you just want to keep going. You don't want to be thinking too much about the food. So again, they wanted to keep going. They wanted to keep at the business of deliberating and going through the evidence. And there was some evidence to have to go through. Although in this case, the defendant here had given pretty much a stated confession. I mean, she'd gone through and she talked about what she'd done. There were excuses for it, a lot of excuses, but there were, what I would say pretty much amounted to a confession. There was a gun. There were, those kinds of pieces of evidence that the jury certainly, though, had to go through and had to sift through. So with any case like this, too, when you're talking about a magnitude of the charges like this, the jury takes their time. They're not going to go so swiftly because even if the evidence is just insurmountable for a defense to overcome, the jury is still going to take a little bit of time because they know how important their verdict is. They know it is a murder case. They know that, whatever their verdict is, it is final, and that it is going to have a huge impact on not only the defendant, but the family, the victim's family, everybody sitting in that courtroom and beyond. So there's a real solemnity that goes with this, and I'm sure that this jury is no different from any other jury, sitting in their kind of shoes. So this is a big moment that we're going to be waiting for with this jury. And unless this jury is different from every other jury in a murder trial, they are probably just way down with the the solemnity of this, wouldn't you think?
Right, absolutely. This is a terrible,
big deal.
terrible case. I mean, every murder is terrible, but when you have a child and you see those pictures where she's so happy, the mom is so happy with the husband and the baby, and then less than 5 days later, she's shot and killed by Sesmas, who admitted shooting her. So it's not a who done it or who did it. And then you know that baby's there, and you know the psychology of these women who steal other women's children and kill them is beyond me, Lise. And I'm sure the jury is coping with that. Remember, the jury's going to end up with PTSD also.
Absolutely,
post-traumatic stress disorder.
Exactly.
Right. They really lived everything, and yet they have to do their duty and go through the evidence, and just you know, I don't know what to say except guilty.
Okay, you know, just on that, and going through the psychology of all that, let's go to a clip of the prosecution closing argument in the case earlier today, and we'll probably get a sense of that, Linda, as we wait for the verdict to come on in the case. Okay, we're back to Kansas in the Sesmas case. We have a verdict in. We don't know what it is yet, but look here, we've got people standing. We've got the defendant back in. Looks like the jury would be back in. We don't see the jury, obviously. But this is when we're going to learn the verdict here momentarily. I've got Linda Kenney Baden with me here. Linda, this is it.
This is it. When you're a defense attorney, when you're a defense attorney, you feel and you're a prosecutor. It also, but I think here everybody knows. I think what the verdict should be. You know, when you shoot somebody in the head, and it's in the middle of the forehead, you intend to kill. So I don't think there could be much discussion about intent. But you know, you never know.
You never know. And they did take a few hours.
Yeah, you never know. But that could be they wanted to be solemn. They wanted to go through the evidence. They wanted to show it.
Yep, okay, we're going to go in now. Let's hear. We'll be here. You're watching the jury come in the Yesenia Sesmas case. You see the defendant sitting there. She's waiting as well as we wait for the jury to come in. They have not been deliberating very long. They asked for pizza for lunch. They had the pizza, and then they had no questions, though, for the lawyers in this case. They had no questions to ask. They just deliberated, had their lunch, and now it's pretty much a full courtroom. It's a packed courtroom as we all wait to hear the verdict in the Sesmas case. Remember, she's been charged with killing another woman, a pregnant woman. Let's listen in now. Yesenia Sesmas guilty of first-degree murder, kidnapping, that's a second charge, and aggravated interference with personal custody, parental custody. So 3 charges, all guilty. Of course, the first 2 charges the most important. First charge, the most important. First-degree murder, that's intentional murder, premeditated murder. You saw her sobbing there. You saw the back of her. She was sobbing. She was then let out of the courtroom. She had to expect that verdict, but you know, the emotional, the gravity of it coming down. Guilty for this defendant on all 3 charges. Sentencing to be held in an indeterminate time ahead of time, but she is guilty on all 3 charges. Linda Kenney Baden, any surprise on that verdict?
No surprise. I mean, you know, I think her attorney must have told her to be ready for this. Although you saw her, she was like sobbing there as the translator is talking to her. Now, maybe it just hit her. What did she do? Why did she do this to the friend? I don't know. But you also saw in juxtaposition over there in the pews, in the audience, the family of the victim holding hands. Wasn't that heartbreaking? It was just heartbreaking, because there are real victims here.
Absolutely.
And they're going to be victims for the rest of their life, including that young baby who's not going to have his biological mother and is going to someday see the pictures of his mother being killed. Because remember, this is a public situation here. So it is just a horrible, horrible case all the way around.
But it looks to me like the jury, you know, did the business that they needed to do. There was a confession here. She tried to, you know, say that she had this baby, and that, you know, she sent pictures of it to her boyfriend. I mean, she was sort of faking something here in a very strange, you know, psychology that Linda and I may talk about later. Very, very strange, but there was pretty much a self-confession here. There really wasn't anything for the defense to do to argue against it. The jury did their job, went through it pretty quickly, ordered out for, you know, got some pizza sent to them, and that was it. And they came back with this verdict, and there was no dilly-dallying, there was nothing around it. They were just, you know, 3 counts, and they were guilty, 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 and the judge pulled them all, and that was the verdict for all of them. And then she was let off, and now she'll be facing sentencing in this case. So we'll have a replay of that of the verdict. Do we have the replay of the verdict ready? Okay. Got it. Some of our viewers were not able to see the verdict read the first time. So for that reason, we apologize for that. We're going to go back, let you see it. Now, that just happened just moments ago, so don't worry, you missed it just by moments. So we're going to hear it right now, and Linda and I will be on the other side. Listen to it now. Yeah. So again, we apologize to our viewers who weren't able to see that the first time. We apologize for any glitch we had there. Now you were able to see it, though, and you were able to see, you know, it being read. And again, this jury did not mess around. They got right to the point. Guilty on all 3 counts, including the absolute, of course, most important one, really. You can kind of stop after this one, which is the first degree, premeditated. You know, look, she planned this. I mean, Linda, people were saying, well, what, the defense maybe didn't do a great job. What could they do?
Actually, I thought he handled himself very well. He said, here's the evidence you're going to have, and here's the law you're really going to have, and you really have to find these things to find her guilty. I mean, if he made stuff up, people would be ragging on him. So I think he really handled himself well.
Yeah, he really, you know. What do you think is the psychology behind...
Wow.
You know, what this woman, I mean...
Well, there's this
she's
taking
not insane,
babies.
I guess, because she knew the insanity is, you know, knowing right from wrong, and she clearly, legally wasn't insane. A, because her lawyer would have pled that, and B, because she seemed to know enough to know that she was confessing to something wrong. Therefore, she knew that what she was doing was wrong, just even by the confession.
And she shot her straight in the head. Let's get down to the nitty-gritty. She really, I mean, she just went right for the kill.
She went right for it.
She went right for the kill. To get a baby that's already been born. Now, we've seen some cases where it's even, I don't know if you could say it's worse, but it's more horrifying. It's not worse, where they actually cut the baby out of the womb to get the baby and steal it. And that brings me, Lise, to some very famous case dealing with a man named Charles Manson, who was responsible. And I mention it because one of the victims in these murders that were orchestrated by this famous killer, Charles Manson, was a woman named Sharon Tate, who was an actress who was very famous at the time.
Right.
And she was very, very pregnant.
Right.
And the killers actually cut her in the womb. They didn't take the baby out, but they cut her in the womb. And I think there was some discussion about whether they should or not at the time. But Lis Wiehl, my friend, who's going to make me now have nightmares at night reading, but it's so good. It's so good. Has written this new book. I don't know if we can see it. It's called Hunting Charles Manson. And if you hold it, I'm going to have you actually sign this, A Quest for Justice in the Days of Helter Skelter. Now, Lise, what people don't understand is, who was Charles Manson?
Oh, well, that's a big part of the book, because, you know, people see him, or, you know, if you look at pictures of him in the latter years in prison before he died. I mean, he just died a few months ago. As I was, you know, finishing up the last edits of this book, he had the tenacity either to live or die or die. I'm like, what are you doing? You're not dying. Wait, you gotta die. Like the day I put this out. But you look at those pictures and you see this guy with the, you know, the put on swastika on his head, and he was like all hunched over, and he got much smaller in prison, but he's kind of like looks crazed. If you look at pictures, you know, back in the day in the 60s and, you know, before the summer of 1969, he was actually kind of, you could say, depending on what picture you looked at, a good-looking guy, and he strummed on the guitar.
Yeah.
And he was a good singer. There's a Beach Boy connection here as well. You have the famous Beach Boys. He was a wannabe Beach Boy singer.
Didn't he want to go kill somebody from the Beach Boys at this house?
He rented from and lived with one of the Beach Boys. So there's a Beach Boy angle to all of this, but more importantly, the Beach Boy angle is he wanted to have music with the Beach Boys, right? And he felt at one point that one of them reneged on, I don't want to give too much away, reneged on a contract with him. So one of the theories is, and I really think it's kind of an interesting is, you know, if he'd gone ahead and gotten a music career going and had been successful, maybe he wouldn't have been so angry, and maybe he wouldn't have, maybe none of this would have happened. But the psychology is just fascinating. So women were just attracted to this
killer, right?
This killer, yeah.
This is Charles Manson, this Hunting Charles Manson book, which comes out today, by the way. It's publication day.
Yes.
So I'm so excited to be with this. But you have like Jack the Ripper, and you have who's famous for killing in the 1800s, and then you have the 1950s. You come with in cold blood with the Clutter family, right? What is it about Charles Manson that puts him in the line of all these serial and spree killers, serial and spree killers?
I think part of it, the charisma, a part of being able to keep this fold around him, these young women that were just so attracted to him and stayed with him, even when everything turned mean. The whole helter-skelter phenomenon, because that was a whole, a plot. That was a whole thing that he was going to, take the world into a whole different direction. And then the fact that those murders that happened in the summer of 1969, 49 years ago this summer, I believe really changed American culture.
Wow.
I mean, it really changed it. People who didn't have locks on their doors, after that summer bought the fanciest home alarm systems they could. We didn't have the term play dates for our children. Children just went and played. They went on their bicycles. They went around. Women then started walking their kids to school. I mean, they just changed what the quote-unquote family did. Changed American culture.
Where were the killings, and how many people were killed? And did he ever kill anybody himself?
Yes, it was in the Los Angeles area. It started with the Gary Hinman killing. So if you take in that killing, that happened days before. Gary Hinman, and I got to actually be good friends with the cousin, Kay Martley, of Gary Hinman, who's still alive and is a lovely lady living now. So that happened days before. Then Sharon Tate, and if you consider that, if you take her baby into consideration, there were six souls lost.
And she was married at that time to whom?
Roman Polanski.
Oh my God, things come around.
Right, it's really strange. And then after that, just right in within 48 hours of all this happening, there was the LaBiancas. That it was a lovely family who had just gone away for the weekend and not even locked their doors in the LA area, and there were 2 people killed then. And Manson was not physically there at any of the murders.
How did he get people to kill? How did this person on this book get people? What's the psychology of that?
He wanted them to, quote unquote, do something witchy. Those were his words. They all lived with him on Spahn Ranch. And by the way, for this book,
yes,
I went to LA. I went to Spahn Ranch, what's left of it there. I
road tripping.
Yeah. Road tripping. I went to where Sharon Tate and the others had their last meal. I went to Cielo Drive. I went to Waverly Drive, the places of the murders.
Did it feel to you like it just happened?
Yes,
Did you get the aura
strange.
That this man who has a swastika carved in the neck? Did it feel to you?
It felt so weird. Like there was a film crew with me there, right? Just crew, 2 guys. And what felt so weird is when I'm sitting down in Spahn Ranch, what's left of it, and if you're familiar with the Manson story, you'll know there's some famous pictures of rocks where, big stones, where he sat and where the quote girls and of the family.
And the girls
sat.
were killers, right?
They became killers.
Killers. It's just amazing.
But I sat on some of those places, and I mean, it's just nature. It's all been overgrown. It's actually a beautiful, idyllic place. But I sat there and I'm just like, I kind of got up from on the rocks. I said, guys, can I get up? I feel really, it feels creepy. It felt creepy.
Did he have a trial or did he plead guilty?
Yes. No, he absolutely had a trial. In fact, I go through that in this hunting case, in the hunting book. I go through all the trials because they all had trials.
He had more than one trial?
He had, well, he and all his co-defendants.
Wow.
Because Manson was tried. But it was fascinating,
Well,
and it just.
I can't wait to go home tonight and
so
read Hunting Charles Manson. And congratulations on your book. It's so fabulous,
much.
and it's amazing how these crimes become all intertwined with the
They really do. And the cult phenomena is not dead. Think of Keith Rainier right now and the sex cult that he's been alleged to have run, and Allison Mack and Smallville, and how that all is going on right now. Those people are awaiting their trials. For sex trafficking, and it has to do with exactly the same kind of cult phenomenon. Wow. So the Manson playbook is not over. We have to learn from history, guys. Okay, speaking of history that is in the making, we have a trial going on right now that we're going to go back to that is going out of North Carolina that's playing live. We have it here. Now remember, this is a wife-swapping case, and no, not that kind of wife-swapping. We're talking about wife-swapping in the sense of in the case where the Bradsher case, where we've got these two prosecutors. One prosecutor has pled guilty. That is Mr. Blitzer, who was on the stand. He has already pled guilty to one count. His wife, Cindy, worked and didn't actually work for her pay. And so Mr. Blitzer already pled guilty to that. The defendant, Mr. Bradsher, is on the stand for having his wife do something similar, actually not working, and he is being the defendant. He's a former prosecutor, now the defendant in the Bradsher case in North Carolina. Take a listen. Well, we're in North Carolina in the Bradsher, the Wallace Bradsher case. Now, this is a little bit interesting here to try to, so hang with me as I try to explain this. This is the wife-swapping case amongst two prosecutors. No, not that kind of wife-swapping. I mean, wife-swapping in the job sense. Now, the gentleman in the orange, we're going to talk about that in a second, aren't we, Linda?
Yes, we are.
She's just ready to talk to you about that. The wife, the man there in the orange has actually pled guilty to one count in this wife-swapping case. He's on the witness stand. He's being cross-examined by the defendant in the case, who's acting as his own lawyer. Why is he acting as his own lawyer? I don't know. We'll talk about that a little more too. But he is trained as a lawyer. He is normally a prosecutor in the courtroom, but he here is the defendant. So he is being charged with this wife-swapping, a bunch of charges: felony obtaining property by false pretense, aiding and abetting, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, that kind of thing. He's actually cross-examining his co-conspirator, who, again, as I said, has already pled guilty to one count. So that's what's going on now, this cross-examination that's gone on now for several hours. They're going over tidbit over what these two wives have done. All day they've gone over this. The guy, Blitzer, who's on the stand here right now, his wife's name is Cindy, so you've heard that name being bandied about before. When he pled guilty to the wife swapping, the Cindy, he had to pay back Cindy's money that he stole pretty much from the state. He had to pay that back. He lost his law license. So this guy in the orange is kind of pretty down and out. Maybe, Linda, that's why he's wearing the orange. He kind of like bonds with prisoners. Why?
You know, you're supposed to dress in the court for certain things that you want to do. He looks like he's wearing an orange prison jumpsuit, the type of someone like who blew up Oklahoma City, Timothy McVeigh wore in that perp walk. I mean, I like the orange, Lise, because it's like your book,
Thank you.
Hunting Charles Manson.
That's over Manson.
But that's for Manson. But, I thought that he actually first looked at him, he was in a prison jumpsuit. No, he's not. And quite frankly, Bradsher needs to make the point that this man is not in jail. He pled guilty to this. His is the wife who didn't work, and he's not in jail. But the jurors may think he looks like he is in jail.
And in fact, we were talking about this. We were a little bit earlier. We were saying, did he go to jail? Is he in prison? Is he just out of prison to, have to talk to this testimony? No. He didn't. So one of the things that, that goes to kind of his testimony here is, he might have gotten kind of a sweet deal in the sense that he's not going to prison. Yes, I mean, he lost his license, which is a big deal, and he has to pay the money back, but he didn't actually go to prison.
Right, and at least remember, his wife is also guilty in this, and she wasn't even charged. She was a participant in this whole scheme because she didn't work for her money, and she had to know she didn't work for her money, and she wasn't charged. So he really did get a sweet deal.
He really got a sweet deal here, right? Exactly. And Bradsher's wife, the man that's actually being charged, there's no real evidence that she didn't work nearly to the point that this guy, the one that's on the stand, I mean, his wife really just flat out didn't work. I mean, she was, for the job that she was paid for, she was getting nursing, taking nursing classes. I mean, she just did not work for this money. So much more egregious on the guy in the orange, outfit. By the way, this is the second day he's worn. I mean, worn the orange outfit. I mean, not that you got to, change every day, but you kind of are going to court. I mean, you do sort of think that people are going to be watching you. Law&Crime is airing you. You know that. So,
well, if I'm Mr. Bradsher, I would say to the jury in closing, look, he looked like he was wearing a prison jumpsuit because he's the one who should be in jail. I'm the one who's pleading not guilty. I mean, maybe make use of it in that way. You've got to be aggressive when you're on trial for basically your freedom.
What do you think about the overall fact that Bradsher is defending himself because he could have gotten a lawyer.
Right.
If he couldn't have afforded one, as we know, one could have been appointed to him, all of that. And certainly Bradsher, as a lawyer, especially a lawyer in this county, prosecutor, he knows his rights.
I actually like the fact that he's defending himself for strategy reasons. One, remember, he was elected, so people are going to kind of know who he is. He's also able to testify in a way by getting his questions through, and he also knows the facts of this case. So when he says, I didn't say that to you, did I?
We didn't have this conversation.
We didn't have this conversation. He is now testifying, and then he actually backed Blitzer down. I keep thinking of, again, the deer in headlines because he is sweating when he's testifying.
He is a little sweaty.
In terms of something saying, no, I didn't say that, or I never said that there, or whatever.
It looks like they are done for the day, so they're taking but not just a break, they're done for the day. You got to think if that's been Blitzer on the stand now. You got the reindeer in my head.
I'm sorry.
I got the reindeer in my head for me now. You got to think if you're Blitzer on the stand and you've been cross-examined for a day. Of course, you got to know that was kind of coming from your friend, but that has got to be a pretty painful day that you've just gone through.
Yes.
Because at one point you were really good friends with Bradsher, right?
Right.
And you were living the life of Riley there.
Right,
you were kind of big shots in the town. You were both having these big, prosecutor type jobs, being entrusted with these jobs in this community of yours. And swapping the wives.
If this is true, what they did, and it is true for Blitzer because he pled guilty. He pled guilty. They have prosecuted people for a lot less in terms of theft, and I bet asked that they go to prison.
Right, and don't forget, as we made the point a little bit earlier, this is North Carolina. North Carolina. Why do I bring that up? And it may have no relevance at all, but we're just kind of throwing it out there. That North Carolina, in not so far distant time ago, had the North Carolina, the horrible rape lacrosse case, and the Duke lacrosse case, excuse me, where
Mr. Nifong,
Mr. Nifong was district attorney, and we all know how that turned out, and that turned out so horribly, and there was really such a horrible smudge against that district attorney, not just a smudge. I mean, that's just a nice way of putting it.
Right.
Where he was not only had his bar card taken, he went to prison.
Rightfully so.
Rightfully so. And as a former prosecutor myself, I mean, I would say absolutely rightfully so, because you have one horrible, stinky, bad apple like that, and it makes all of the rest, the whole batch.
Well, it looks like North Carolina, when they get evidence that there's wrongdoing, goes after their prosecutors.
Yes, yes. And you know what? We've been following this other case, this horribly sad case.
My heart.
Out of Kansas, and the Sesmas case. We did have a verdict in that case just a little bit ago. We're going to play that verdict. We had a little bit of trouble, audio trouble with it earlier on, so we're going to play it one more time for you today. The jury sent a strong message in that case. Let's hear what the jury had to say. You just heard the verdict in the Sesmas case out of Kansas. We've been following that, such a tragic case. Linda Baden, Kenney Baden, such a tragic case, but the jury was emphatic in that case, guilty on all counts, including the most important count of murder in the first degree.
You know, it's an example of how, you know, we go from one case that's a white collar crime case where the only damage is money and people who are taxpayers, but then we see that the court system has all kinds in it, and even though those are prosecutors, and we go for this with the heartfelt, you know, the mother of a newborn infant 5 days old, and she gets killed, bullet through her head by a woman who steals her baby and destroys many, many lives. And the dichotomy of seeing the two, you know, the well-heeled prosecutors are stealing money to this poor family that's working and has this baby taken. It just breaks my heart. It breaks my heart.
And as we've talked about, that infant will, you know, grow up without a biological mother.
Right, right. And I can't see how everyone's not affected. The listeners, the viewers, the jurors, the judge, how you cannot be affected by that case is beyond me, because I know I'm affected, and I'm sure you are too.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being here.
Pleasure being here on your
day.
Yeah, we have matching
Charles Manson. Yeah. Yes, I hope that you guys will take a look at it. I spent the last year and a half, almost 2 years, writing and researching the book. I had a fascinating time, and it really reads like a thriller. And I hope you'll take a look at it. You know, it's an interesting book about an interesting time.
By an interesting author.
Thank you. That's it for Law and Crime today. We'll be back on the other side. See you tomorrow.